Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Before we dive into tonight's creepy story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a scare. Now, let's get started. It was early spring when I decided it was time to escape the dreary Massachusetts weather and take a much-needed break at my beach house in South Carolina. This modest little 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom getaway had become my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and disconnect from the chaos of my daily life. When I wasn't using it, I rented it out on Airbnb to help cover the mortgage. The place wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was comfortable enough, and I had gotten used to the routine of hosting guests. The master bedroom, where I kept my belongings, was always locked up tight, a fortress for my personal life. As I packed for my journey, I reflected on the previous guest, a man named Ethan, who had rented the house with his girlfriend. He seemed friendly enough. We had exchanged messages about local restaurants, and he asked a few questions that made him appear trustworthy. After a grueling 16-hour drive, I arrived at my beach house around 10 p.m., exhausted and eager to sleep. I unlocked the door, lugged my bags inside, and headed straight to the master bedroom, too tired to do anything but crash. I didn't even bother to check the rest of the house. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I jolted awake, my heart pounding, a feeling of unease settling over me like a heavy blanket. The house was quiet, but something felt off, as if the shadows themselves were watching. I tossed and turned, trying to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like a stubborn ghost. Finally, I decided to get up and investigate. I stepped out into a hallway, the familiar surroundings looking slightly different in the dim light. Everything appeared untouched, just as I had left it. The kitchen, the living room, even the guest rooms, everything was in order. However, as I walked past one of the guest rooms, I noticed that the bed looked slightly disturbed, the sheets wrinkled as if someone had just been lying there. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt like an intruder in my own home. Compelled by a sense of dread, I returned to my bedroom and grabbed my phone, checking the porch camera footage. I was desperate for reassurance. What I saw made my stomach drop. The footage showed Ethan entering the house 3 days ago, alone. No girlfriend. No one else. The absence of any further motion captured on camera was unsettling. A knot formed in my stomach as I felt the shadows grow darker around me. Feeling uneasy, I quickly sent a message to Ethan through the Airbnb app, asking if he had checked out. While I waited for a reply, I paced the house, my heart racing with every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I opened closets and peered into every room, my mind racing with dark thoughts. Was someone still here? Was Ethan lying to me? I had to know. That's when I heard it, a soft click. The master bedroom door, which I had left locked, had just closed. I felt my blood run cold. I wasn't just imagining things. Someone was inside my room. I crouched down to look through the small crack at the bottom of the door, and my heart stopped. I saw 2 feet standing just a few feet away from me, still and silent. My breath caught in my throat, and panic surged through my veins like ice water. I had to think quickly. With trembling hands, I dashed to the kitchen, praying for a weapon. I knew I kept a carving knife in the drawer, but when I flung it open, my heart sank. It was gone. The weight of fear pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I had to get out of there. I bolted for the front door, flinging it open and sprinting outside into the cool night air. My mind raced as I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. "Please, you need to send someone quickly. I think there's someone in my house." Within minutes that felt like hours, the police arrived. I stood outside, my heart racing as they entered my home, flashlights cutting through the darkness. I held my breath, half expecting a confrontation, my mind racing with thoughts of the intruder. Would I be safe? When they re-entered the living room, my heart sank further. There sat Ethan, calm as could be, slouched on the couch as if he had been there all along. He looked up at the officers with wide, innocent eyes, a smile creeping across his face. "I just needed a place to stay for one more night," he said, his voice deceptively casual. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the officers began to question him. They seemed to buy his story, their skeptical expressions softening. They turned to me, and I could see the doubt in their eyes. "There's no sign of forced entry, and he claims he didn't do anything wrong," one of them said, glancing back at Ethan, who still looked like the friendly guy I had communicated with. "But he wasn't supposed to be here. He lied to me. He's not even supposed to be in this house," I exclaimed, my voice trembling with frustration. "He could have harmed me." The officers exchanged glances before they decided to let Ethan go, a decision that left me reeling. "You need to resolve this with Airbnb," one officer suggested, as if that were a reasonable solution to the terror I had just experienced. As Ethan left, he flashed me a knowing smile, and I felt my skin crawl. I stood there, watching him walk away, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. The door shut behind him with a finality that echoed in my mind. The police remained for a few more minutes, their presence doing little to ease the dread that had settled in my bones. They didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation, or the psychological toll it had taken on me. Once they finally left, I locked the door, my hands shaking as I changed the lock code, desperate to feel safe again. I immediately contacted Airbnb, my heart racing as I typed out my message, detailing the ordeal. They confirmed that Ethan had been banned from the platform, but they offered no compensation for the night he had stayed without my consent. I was left feeling even more frustrated. I had just faced a potential threat in my own home, and there was no justice for me. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. I was haunted by the thought that Ethan could have been waiting to do me harm. What if I hadn't woken up? What if he had decided to confront me instead of just sitting quietly in my living room? The entire experience felt surreal, like something out of a horror movie, but it was my reality. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside sent me into a panic. I found myself checking the locks multiple times before going to bed, sleeping with my phone at my side, ready to call for help at a moment's notice. I replayed the events in my head over and over, questioning every decision I had made that night. I felt exposed, raw, and unsure of who I could trust. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that the incident was behind me, but the feeling of unease lingered. Friends and family urged me to forget about it, to take another trip down to South Carolina and enjoy my beach house again. They didn't understand. How could I relax knowing what had happened? Knowing that a stranger had invaded my personal space, even if just for one night? Weeks passed, and I finally decided to return to South Carolina. I thought it would help me regain a sense of normalcy, but as I drove down, the memories flooded back. I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of Ethan, my heart racing every time I saw a figure on the street. When I arrived, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the house. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart as I stepped inside. The familiarity of the space felt like a warm embrace, but underneath it lay a cold tension. I moved cautiously, checking every corner and ensuring that nothing felt out of place. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept my phone nearby, scrolling through the news and messages to distract myself. But sleep eluded me, my mind racing with images of Ethan's face, that eerie smile of innocence. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, twisting and turning, reminding me of how close I had come to something truly horrifying. The days turned into a blur as I tried to force myself to enjoy my stay. I visited the beach, walked along the shore, and even tried to go to a few restaurants, but I always felt on edge. It was as if I were waiting for something to happen, as if the other shoe was about to drop. One afternoon, as I walked back to the house, I noticed a figure standing near the porch, my heart dropping as I recognized the outline. Ethan was back. Panic surged through me as I turned on my heel, my instincts screaming for me to run. But before I could make it to my car, he called out to me. "Hey! I just wanted to talk," he shouted, his voice friendly yet eerily calm. I froze, my heart racing. "What do you want?" I managed to call back, my voice shaky. He took a step closer, a smile plastered across his face. I told you, I just needed a place to stay. I was hoping we could work something out. Work something out? I scoffed, anger bubbling up inside me. You have no right to be here. You're banned from this property. His smile faltered for a moment, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something darker in his eyes. Come on, don't be like that. We can put this behind us. I promise I won't hurt you. The calmness in his voice sent chills down my spine. I backed away, my heart pounding as I pulled out my phone to call the police. Stay right there. I'm calling the cops. But before I could press dial, Ethan's demeanor shifted completely. You really think they'll help you? He said, his voice low and menacing. You think they'll believe you over me? I just needed a little kindness. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized how vulnerable I was. I had already reported him once. Would anyone believe me again? My fingers trembled as I dialed 911, and he took another step toward me, a predatory glint in his eye. I stood my ground, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I shouted into the phone. I need help. There's a man here, and I feel threatened. Ethan's expression hardened, and he took a step back, hands raised in mock surrender. You really don't want to do this, he said, his voice dripping with false charm. You don't know what I'm capable of. The operator's voice crackled through the line, assuring me that help was on the way, but all I could focus on was Ethan's menacing presence. I felt trapped, the walls closing in around me. My heart raced as I imagined every possible scenario, every terrible outcome. And then, as if the universe was mocking me, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief flooded through me, but Ethan's expression shifted again, this time to one of irritation. You don't need to involve them. We can settle this like adults, he said, his voice turning cold. No, I said firmly, my voice shaking but resolute. You need to leave. Now. He scoffed, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he shifted his weight as he calculated his next move. I could sense he was weighing his options, and in that moment, I realized I had to stand my ground. I wouldn't be intimidated in my own home. As the police cars pulled up, I felt a rush of gratitude. They quickly assessed the situation, approaching Ethan with caution. He tried to play innocent, but my heart was racing with hope. Finally, I could be safe again. The officers detained him, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I stepped back, feeling the weight of fear lift from my shoulders. They questioned me, and I relayed everything that had happened, every detail of my ordeal. It felt like a catharsis, like I was finally reclaiming my power. Ethan was taken away, his protest fading into the distance as the police reassured me I was safe. The relief washed over me, but the fear lingered. I knew I would never feel completely safe in that house again. The experience had left a mark on my soul, a scar that would take time to heal. In the weeks that followed, I found solace in the fact that justice had finally been served. I took my beach house back, making it a safe space once more. But every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind served as a reminder of the shadows that had once invaded my sanctuary. I learned to be vigilant, to trust my instincts, and most importantly, to never let my guard down again. I was forever changed, shaped by the terror I had faced. But I also emerged stronger, determined to protect my home and my peace. In the quiet moments of the night, when the waves crashed against the shore, I knew that I had survived. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. My name is Eric, and I'm 26 years old, living in a small town in Virginia. Lately, life has felt like a heavy weight on my shoulders. Between my job at a local bookstore, my parents' constant nagging about finding a real career, and the pressure from my girlfriend, Jenna, to take our relationship more seriously, I just needed an escape. That's when I decided to rent a small cabin in Troutdale, Virginia, hoping for some peace in the woods. After a brief conversation with my parents, where I assured them this weekend away was just what I needed to clear my head, I hit the road. Jenna was suspicious, raising her eyebrows when I told her I'd be going alone. "Are you sure you're okay with that?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I brushed it off, convincing myself that a solo trip was exactly what I needed. I packed my things, just a few clothes, my laptop, and some snacks, and began the 2.5-hour drive to the cabin. As I drove along the winding roads, the trees grew taller, thicker, and more dense, creating a wall of green that shielded me from the outside world. I could feel the tension in my chest easing, the grip of my stress loosening with every mile. I followed the GPS directions, making my way deeper into the countryside until I finally arrived at the cabin. Nestled among the towering trees, the one-bedroom cabin looked like something out of a postcard, wooden, rustic, and charming. I parked the car, grabbed my bags, and headed inside. Following the owner's instructions, I found the key hidden under a rock near the door. Once inside, I was greeted by the warm glow of sunlight streaming through the windows and the faint scent of pine. It was cozy, just as I had hoped. I spent the first couple of hours exploring the nearby trails, enjoying the serene quiet and the sound of birds chirping. It felt refreshing to be away from the noise of my everyday life. But that tranquility was soon interrupted. As I was driving back to the cabin, I noticed two strange men walking along the gravel road. They looked out of place, their faces shrouded in shadows, and when I waved, they didn't respond. Their cold, empty stares sent an uneasy shiver down my spine. Later that evening, while I was preparing dinner, I saw the same two figures darting into the woods near the cabin. My heart raced, and a feeling of dread settled in my stomach. I decided to text the Airbnb owner, letting her know about my discomfort. But she simply brushed off my concerns, explaining that local teens often roam the area. "Don't worry about it," she said in a cheerful tone. "Just enjoy your stay." That night, I needed to restock on groceries, so I ventured out to the nearest Walmart, about 20 minutes away. As I drove along the winding gravel roads, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The darkness outside was overwhelming, swallowing up the light from my headlights. Every shadow seemed to morph into something sinister. I hurriedly grabbed what I needed and returned to the cabin, locking the door behind me, my heart still pounding. Settling down by the fireplace with a book, I tried to lose myself in the pages, but the unease lingered. Just when I thought I could finally relax, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. The only light came from the flickering fire, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I fumbled with my phone, trying to text the owner again, but with no power, the signal was weak. The owner advised me to check the circuit breaker outside by a telephone pole. The thought of stepping outside into the pitch-black night filled me with dread. What if those men come back? I thought. I tried to ignore it, burying myself deeper into my book. But then I heard it, a faint creak from the bathroom. My heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable, a deliberate footstep echoing in the stillness of the cabin. I held my breath, straining to hear. And that's when I saw it. A figure stood in the doorway, illuminated only by the flickering firelight. The man was tall, his face obscured in shadow, but I could make out the glint of something metallic in his hand. "Stay calm," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Hand over your belongings." Panic surged through me. I tried to sound brave. "I don't have much," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just my laptop and some cash." The figure stepped closer, and my heart raced even faster. The cabin, which had felt like a retreat, suddenly turned into a prison. "Empty your wallet and go to the kitchen," he ordered. I nodded, trembling as I moved toward the kitchen. I opened my wallet and handed over the cash, hoping he would leave me unharmed. "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Just take what you want and go." Moments later, I heard the front door close with a thud. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. Once I felt sure the coast was clear, I rushed to check my backpack. It was gone. My laptop, my cash, it was all taken. Fear and disbelief flooded my mind as I dialed 911, my hands shaking. When the police arrived about 20 minutes later, they took my statement, and promised to keep an eye out for anyone matching the description of the men I'd seen earlier. But deep down, I felt hopeless. How could I ever feel safe again in this cabin? I decided to contact the Airbnb owner once more, hoping she would offer some support or a refund. But to my shock, she was only sympathetic to a point. "I can't refund you," she said, her voice cold. "I don't control what happens outside the cabin." The trip I had envisioned as a peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare. I was shaken, questioning everything about my surroundings and the people involved. How had the intruder gotten in? The door had been locked. I had been careful. Could the owner have been involved? The thought gnawed at me, a festering doubt that I couldn't shake. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I stayed up, jumping at every sound, the wind rattling the windows, branches scraping against the walls, and the distant hoot of an owl. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, knowing I was alone in a cabin that no longer felt like a sanctuary. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight crept through the trees, but they did little to lift the weight of dread that hung over me. I packed my belongings, my mind racing with a mix of fear and anger. I was done. I couldn't stay another minute in that cabin, with the unsettling knowledge of what had transpired hanging over me. I drove back home in a daze, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. The feeling of betrayal haunted me. Was it really safe to trust anyone, even those who provided temporary refuge? The cabin that promised solace now felt like a cursed space, an unwilling participant in a horror story I never wanted to be a part of. When I finally arrived home, my parents were relieved to see me back. "How was your trip?" my mom asked, her smile fading when she saw the look on my face. "Did you have fun?" I shook my head, too exhausted to recount the events of the weekend. How could I explain the terror I had faced? Jenna called later that evening. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I wanted to tell her everything, to share the story of my harrowing experience. But I felt ashamed, embarrassed that I hadn't been able to protect myself. Instead, I shrugged it off. "It was just different," I replied, not ready to open up about the nightmare. In the days that followed, the unease lingered. I found myself glancing over my shoulder every time I left the house, every rustle in the trees causing my heart to race. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something sinister lurked just beyond my line of sight. The experience scarred me deeply, and I struggled to feel safe in my own skin. I began questioning everything, trusting people, the world outside my door, the very idea of solitude. My weekend escape turned into a haunting memory, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. A few weeks later, I decided to report the incident to the authorities again, sharing my suspicions about the Airbnb owner. I needed to feel like I had done something, anything, to reclaim a sense of control over my life. But when I walked into the police station, I was met with skepticism. "We can't do anything without more evidence," the officer told me, crossing his arms. "You should just avoid secluded places next time." I left, frustrated and disheartened. It was as if the world had turned a blind eye to my pain, leaving me to grapple with the haunting memories alone. I found myself scrolling through social media, looking for any signs of the two men or the cabin's owner, but nothing surfaced. I tried to immerse myself in work and hobbies, hoping to distract myself from the trauma. Yet, every time I turned a corner, every time I felt a presence behind me, I was reminded of that night. I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, certain that I could hear the creak of floorboards in my own home, convinced that something was lurking just out of sight. Months passed, and while life resumed its normal pace, the shadow of that weekend never fully receded. I often thought about returning to the cabin, confronting the fear that still gripped me. Maybe I needed to face it head-on, to reclaim what had been taken from me. But as each day passed, that thought faded, replaced by the wisdom of caution. I'll never forget the summer of our high school graduation. It was a time filled with laughter, freedom, and the kind of friendship that made us feel invincible. We had decided to celebrate this milestone with a weekend getaway to an Airbnb cabin tucked away in the serene mountains of New Hampshire. The group consisted of my friends Mia, Ethan, Sarah, Ethan's girlfriend, Zoe, and me, Alex. We piled into my trusty little Hyundai Accent, our excitement palpable as we hit the road. The drive was filled with music, laughter, and a few too many snacks. We rolled the windows down, letting the warm summer breeze tousle our hair and the sun beat down on us, making everything feel perfect. As we approached our destination, the landscape changed from suburban sprawl to rolling hills and dense forests. The cabin was supposed to be our slice of paradise, and as we pulled up, we could see why. It was picturesque, framed by towering trees and surrounded by nature that seemed to breathe life into the air. But it was the shed beside the cabin that caught my eye. It was an old structure, leaning slightly to one side, its paint peeling and faded. I frowned at the sight. It hadn't been mentioned in the Airbnb listing, and something about it sent a shiver down my spine. Mia, ever the jokester, nudged me with her elbow. Maybe that's why it was so cheap. She laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Everyone chuckled, but I felt a knot form in my stomach. Once we settled in, we claimed our spaces. Mia and I opted for the pull-out couch in the living room. She refused to sleep in a bedroom that opened directly to the outside. I could hardly blame her. I shared her unease about that shed. The place was charming, but the lingering presence of that dilapidated structure was unsettling. Later, we unwound in the hot tub, the warmth of the water easing the tension from the drive. We laughed and swapped stories, sipping on drinks we may or may not have acquired through less than legal means. Ethan teased me about my growing closeness with Mia, and I could feel my face heat up. But I brushed it off, the playful banter making the moment feel lighter. As the night deepened, I found myself mesmerized by the stars. Around 2 a.m., Mia, Zoe, and I ventured out onto the deck, the cool night air wrapping around us like a soft blanket. We stood there, gazing up at the endless expanse of stars, feeling a profound sense of peace in that isolated place. But then, from the direction of the shed I heard it, a crunching sound, heavy and deliberate, like footsteps crushing twigs underfoot. "Did you hear that?" Zoe whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. I nodded, my heart racing. Initially, I thought it might be a raccoon or a fox. But the weight of those steps sent a chill down my spine. "Let's go inside," I suggested, trying to sound casual, but the urgency in my voice betrayed me. I ushered them back inside, locking the door behind us. "Probably just an animal," I reassured them, though my stomach twisted with unease. Mia looked skeptical, her brow furrowed. The laughter from earlier seemed a distant memory as we huddled together, listening intently for any signs of what might be lurking outside. The next morning, breakfast was a much-needed distraction. As we sat around the table, sunlight streaming through the windows, the eerie events of the previous night seemed to fade into the background. Everyone except Mia, who still looked uneasy, her eyes darting towards the window. After breakfast, we decided to explore the nearby trails, hiking through the breathtaking scenery of Mount Washington and the Flume Gorge. The beauty of the mountains was breathtaking, but Mia remained on edge, frequently glancing back at the cabin as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mia insisted we check out the old shed. I hesitated, not wanting to appear cowardly in front of the group. "What's the worst that could happen?" Ethan said, egging us on. I sighed and followed Mia, Zoe, and Ethan to the shed. Inside, it was dim and musty. A worn rocking chair sat in one corner, its wood splintered and faded. The air was thick with the smell of cigarette smoke, remnants of a past long forgotten. "This place is creepy," Zoe remarked, wrinkling her nose. "Let's get out of here," I suggested, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. But Mia lingered for a moment longer, her eyes scanning the dust-covered shelves. "It's just an old shed," I told myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. That evening, we gathered around a campfire, the flames dancing in the darkness, crackling and popping as we shared stories and roasted marshmallows. But just as I was starting to relax, the atmosphere shifted. The peaceful ambience shattered when I heard it. Fast, crunching footsteps racing toward us from the tree line. "What was that?" Mia gasped, her voice shaky. Before anyone could answer, a flash of green light illuminated the backyard, casting long, eerie shadows that made my heart race. It was brief, but it felt like an eternity, as if time had stopped for that single moment. Stephanie, who had been sitting on the edge of her seat, screamed, her face pale with terror. "We need to go! Now!" She bolted toward the house, panic in her eyes. The fear coursed through me as we all scrambled to our feet, yelling for each other to hurry. "Get inside!" I shouted, knocking Zoe over in the rush. My heart pounded as I raced to the door, but I hesitated. I had to help Mia. I turned back, grabbing her hand and pulling her along. As we reached the back door, Rob stood there, bear spray clutched in his hands. "Go inside! Now!" he urged. I felt a surge of panic and adrenaline, my mind racing with the possibilities of what could be lurking just out of sight. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a dark figure hovering at the edge of the firelight, its shape indistinct but undeniably menacing. My blood ran cold. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Run!" Rob shouted, and we burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. We locked it, our breaths coming in quick, panicked gasps. Shaken, we all gathered in the living room, hearts racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I fished it out to call the police. The operator assured me help was on the way. As we waited, we tried to catch our breath, but the tension in the room was palpable. When the police arrived, an officer entered with a flashlight, searching the area outside. The minutes dragged on like hours as we huddled together, too afraid to move. Finally, the officer returned, shaking his head. "No signs of an intruder," he said. "The green flash was likely lightning hitting a nearby power line. As for the figure you saw, it might have been a fisher cat. They're known to cause a ruckus." "But I saw a man," Stephanie insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "He was hunched over and draped in a cloak." The officer frowned, his expression serious. "I assure you, it's not uncommon for the mind to play tricks in situations like this. You were all likely just scared and seeing things." But we didn't feel reassured. How could we, after the panic that had gripped us just moments before? The officer left, promising to patrol the area, but the damage was done. Anxiety hung thick in the air, suffocating and relentless. We sat in the living room, exchanging uneasy glances. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow darker, and every creak of the cabin felt magnified. "I don't think we should stay another night," Mia finally said, breaking the silence that hung heavily between us. The group reluctantly agreed. After gathering our things, we loaded back into the Hyundai, the once familiar surroundings of the cabin now feeling hostile and foreign. As we drove away, I cast one last glance in the rearview mirror, the cabin shrinking in the distance. The shed loomed ominously behind it, a shadow of something I couldn't quite understand. We didn't talk much on the way back, the silence heavy with unspoken fear. The events of that night lingered like a ghost, haunting our minds as we returned to the familiarity of home.